So hi, my name is Sarah Shively, and I'm the filmmaker behind Mugshots in the Digital Age. And this is our panel discussion for the Portland Film Festival. We have in our panel today, Darcelle 15 and Therese Bottomley, the editor of content at the Oregonian, Morgan Godvin, who is an activist, writer, and advocate for drug advocacy here in Oregon, and Sheriff Curtis Landers of Lincoln County. And we're going to be largely talking today about the issues surrounding online mugshots and how the policies are changing and the impact it's had on people and some of the possibilities we have in the months and years ahead on this issue. I do have a little clip I thought I'd start us out with, and this is relating to Darcelle, who was
Pardon me, but I have a, yeah. Do I touch something to make it go away? Oh, here.
Oh, are you having a tech problem?
Not really. There, thank you.
Thank you, Poison.
That was a blank.
So yeah, I'm going to show a little section from the video about the arrest incident for Darcelle 15, and then I have some questions for her. Everyone seeing the screen right now?
Black.
Oh, mugshots.
There it is.
Know then that I was arrested.
Sarah, unmute yourself, please.
Drag with handcuffs on. And I said, I wonder what I did wrong. And she said, you touched somebody. The mugshot was then in the paper. If I wasn't well known, that could destroy the rest of your life for a lot of people. You know, even if they felt not guilty, they've still been there.
So just for a little context, I was doing some research on Darcelle for another project, an entirely different student film project. And that was when I came across her mugshot.
The mugshot.
Yeah. And I had no idea how she might feel if I interviewed her or talked to her about this, but I really wanted to. You know, I vetted it first with one of her friends, and okay, yeah, she'd probably talk to you about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was no problem at all. So we had a quick little interview and got the story. And where that clip ends is sort of the heart of the matter here, this whole issue about, you know, the problem for people when these mugshots are online. And for you, Darcelle, it hasn't in a lot of respects been that much of a problem because in large part, you've got your fame to protect you from harm of just having your mugshot up there. But nevertheless, it's been there. Does it bother you that this has lingered online for as long as it has? Has it maybe actually been an asset that your mugshot's out there?
Not at all an asset. How many times? I don't know how many times you're going to say I'm not guilty. Isn't that's what everybody says? And they don't know. You know, I could have done something dreadful. So it's not a good thing. I would hope, it's been a long time for me since it was in, and I would hope that it would go away one of these days, but it won't.
Well, we'll talk about some of that too, just because I think there are some pathways to getting these mugshots removed. But for a long time, there really weren't. And so maybe that's something we can address with other people in the panel. but you sort of bring forward the principal part of the whole piece, which is that they are a problem for so many people, and sometimes for different reasons. And often the people who have the most problem with them are not the people who are accessible. They aren't the people you can easily interview or find, or people who are going to talk to you. So I really appreciated that both you and Morgan, who've had your mugshots online, were in a position to at least have this conversation with us and help bring this this issue forward. We've gone through a real transition in terms of what it used to be. Mugshots didn't used to appear in the paper. They didn't used to appear anywhere. They were in their origin really just a law enforcement tool. And I don't know if Sheriff Landers, if you can reflect on what mugshots were like when you maybe first started your career as a police officer. I don't think they quite had the sort of currency that they do today.
No, thank you. They absolutely didn't. And I've been with the Lee County Sheriff's Office for 34 years, and I have worked in the jail, and you know, they were a tool for law enforcement. Booking photos were a tool to identify, yes, this was the person that was booked in this day on these charges, and but they're also a law enforcement tool if we needed to use it to help locate somebody in the future and put that out to other law enforcement agencies. But you know, really, I mean, there's really, I guess, no blame, but technology really has got us where we are today, to where they're so accessible. Because I remember back in the day, we would take the photo, we'd have to send it in, get it developed. Photos would come back, you know, a few days later. We basically take that photo and stick it in the booking file, and that was it. There was no way that it was released. You know, somebody could submit a public records request, but it would be days before we would go and develop another one, get it to that person, and you know, the timing of that would just be lost. But technology, as we have today now, you know, the booking photos are immediate, they're digital, and you know, and I think law enforcement, jails, sheriffs were a lot of times blamed because they thought we were the ones exploiting these photos over the years, and it wasn't that at all. It was really the accessibility, and with public records law, we were getting several requests all the time to obtain those photos, which was requiring a lot of time for our staff to go through and have to get that photo, email it, whatever we were doing. And so based on that and public records laws, we posted them online. Well, you know, unfortunately, I don't know if got in the wrong hands is the right word, but they were given to, or anybody could go get them, and then companies were using them to, you know, further exploit and say, you pay us so much money to take it down. And obviously what House Bill 3273 was, you know, there to address that law enforcement sheriffs support wholeheartedly to you know, get that piece out of there, because it wasn't the intention of them all at all. The reason why we made them available was because of the mass quantity of requests that we were receiving.
Do you know, or I don't know if you can give us a ballpark at any rate, when that happened, that they suddenly became accessible online for the public?
Well, I'd have to estimate, I would say probably, you know, 8 to 10 years ago, I'm going to say, is when it started. I've been sheriff for 6 years here, and it happened before I was sheriff, so I'm kind of just basing that estimate on that. And, you know, it was kind of, I think agencies kind of developed into posting them online via their online system. It didn't happen all at once, and I think it was just the ease of getting those out, but that would be an estimate when it probably occurred.
Therese, I wanted to get you to weigh in on this transition as well. Do you have sort of a recollection at what point using mugshots became somehow part of the crime story diet and was sort of a thing where it hadn't really been a thing and now it's a thing. Do you know when that kind of happened? And can you talk about that a little bit?
You know, I don't really remember specifically. I guess I would have said maybe in the late 90s. Just guessing. I've been at the paper a long time. And I think when I watched your film was the first time I thought, oh, maybe there was a time they weren't so ubiquitous, but it sort of reminded me that there was a time when they weren't routinely released. There is you know, a movement, as you said, to kind of recognize the news media, to recognize the age of Google, I call it, where, you know, when I started at the newspaper in 1983, you would go into the newspaper morgue, which is what the library is called, and you would pull out a file cabinet, kind of like the library, old library file cabinets, and you would flip through a bunch of index cards until you would find a news clipping that literally was clipped out of the newspaper and pasted to an index card under, you know, robbery or whatever it was, or the person's name. And we had a staff of librarians who would, you know, clip out anything that we published and file it away. And it was not that easy to come across. So it was in the paper one day and gone the next. And unless you had access to microfilm or our own internal archives, it was pretty hard to find, certainly a lot more difficult than just Googling somebody's name.
Yeah, and this is ultimately where a lot of this discussion gets narrowed, is the impact of the search engine and what is possible because of it. But I wanted you to just tell us a little bit, we talk about it very briefly in the film, but there is definitely a movement happening at the Oregonian and at some other newspapers across the country to take some measures, regardless of what may be the state laws, to address the harm and the impact that having some of these up has caused. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I became editor in 2018, and not too long after that, our internal committee that looks at issues around diversity and inclusion started talking about our use of mugshots, and came back with a proposal that we limit some of the use of the mugshots so that sometimes they would appear with very little context. They often were used as the main image in a post online. And it seemed a little outsized and not in context. And so we started limiting them to not being used as the main image with any news article. And then over time, we tightened that down to essentially, we don't use mugshots unless there is some purpose, such as somebody's a fugitive or that they are suspected in additional crimes. They're trying to find additional victims, or there may be cases when they're particularly prominent, when it's a particularly prominent crime. For instance, the one I used as my example was the police officers arrested in the killing of George Floyd. We did use those mugshots. So it's not a hard and fast rule that we never use mugshots anymore, but it's quite a bit rarer than it used to be.
At what point did you decide that organizationally there was going to be this committee and you were going to respond to people's requests to take down or de-index? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so last year we took it a step further and started opening up examination of any older articles that we had online. And we have a process where someone can now ask us to re-examine coverage from the past to see whether or not there is any journalistic reason to have that mugshot remain online, whether there is any journalistic reason to have that news article with their name attached to it to still be up there with their name searchable. So there are some gradations where the newsroom can make adjustments if the committee decides to recommend that, in fact, the the transgression that was reported on is so old that there's no longer any news value, that it was so minor, there's no longer any news value. Any of these considerations that they look at when somebody submits their request, we can either remove the mugshot from the post, we can remove the name if we agree that we think that is the right thing to do, or we can leave things as they are, but ask Google to de-index it so that people cannot Google it to find that material. It remains online, but it's much harder to find through search engines. So this was part of a trend across the newspaper industry and the news industry. One of the chief drivers of this was the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com, which is a sister newspaper and website of ours, part of the same advanced local family. And they got quite a bit of attention for having started this trend of sort of re-examining old news and looking at, does it have a disproportionate effect on somebody's life down the line, where really, because of Google and the ease in which somebody can find it, if you were a teenager and got arrested for a minor crime and you pleaded guilty and did your time, and should that really cause harm 10 years later when somebody Googles you and you're looking for a job? So we talked to our sister site about this, decided we wanted to go down this path as well, started our own internal committee to look at these cases, and have been actively since either early this year or late last year, have been looking at submissions and making determinations about what is the best result that we should come to. There are some things like sex crimes that we would probably, under our guidelines, we would not change. But if there's a minor crime in somebody's past that is still, again, causing them outsides, in our view, consequences to what the original crime was, then we certainly are willing to take another look at that.
I wanted to bring Morgan into this conversation. Morgan, you have been able to speak so eloquently about the impact that having your mugshot has had on your life, and similarly on the lives of other people who have been incarcerated, other people who have dealt with drug issues. What can you give us a couple of examples, whether they're yours personally or people of how this has really impacted your everyday life?
Yeah, for me personally, when I very first got out of prison and already had a work gap on my resume as I tried to find a job, it was incredibly damaging because I have a very unique name. Everyone with my last name is related to me. So you search my name and it was like the only thing that came up. And I had so many mugshots. It looked like I was being arrested dozens of times, but I was being transferred facilities and getting violations. And those were all because then, if I go from Multnomah County Jail to Columbia County Jail, it's just a transfer, but I'm getting a new booking photo taken, and then that's being put online. And so it looked like I had this absurd quantity of arrests, which was just not true. I had 2 possession and then a federal arrest, and those were like my only indictments, my only crimes, but that totaled something like 24 mugshots. Just outrageous. And when I was very first out of prison and trying to distance myself from that and, reclaim my footing in society after years away, it was incredibly shaming. I just knew, if I turn in this resume and if they just Google my name, all you have to do is Google my name and it is the first thing that comes up. And just the fear of that happening, maybe they were never going to Google my name. Maybe these employers were never going to do that. Maybe that was never going to happen. But I had to live with that psychological fear every time I handed in a resume. Now, as time went on, my career path shifted, and now I've built an entire career out of the fact that I am formerly incarcerated. Like, I am now an editor at JSTOR Daily, over a prison newspaper collection. It's just my entire career, right? So now I have no shame. I'm like, yeah, whatever, my mugshots are online. But also now I've just put out so much content in all my freelancing that they no longer even come up. Like you have to go on like page 3 of the search results to see it. That's me. I'm highly privileged because I've been able to make a career out of the fact I used to be addicted to heroin and then went to prison. So like that is not a representative example. Other people cannot replicate this. But a great example of someone who it's incredibly damning for is my aunt's best friend was arrested and convicted on a misdemeanor. She is a self-employed professional in the mental health field. When people, and again, has a unique name. So when you search her name, say you're looking for someone with her specialty in the field, her website comes up, yes, and also her mugshots of a misdemeanor offense from a decade ago. And it has really hurt her business because she is self-employed. And then people see that and do not want to seek, do not want to pay for her services. And she's tried to hire search engine optimization experts. She's tried to do everything in her power to fix this. She's in her late 60s, 70s now, so she's not very tech savvy. I've tried to help her, but it doesn't happen. And her potential clients are still being scared off by a decade-old Multnomah County misdemeanor arrest. And anyone who just doesn't have the privilege to stand on a microphone and openly talk about their experiences, this is damning when it is the first thing that comes up.
Thank you for that, Morgan. I think that you just are able to give voice to this problem so well. So here's the thing. When I started doing this research and bringing all of you into the storyline, what I didn't actually realize was happening was that this was really being seriously addressed in the Oregon State Legislature with this House bill. And I was wondering, Sheriff Landers, if you could just give us a skinny on what the House bill represents and what kind of changes lie ahead.
Sure, thank you. It basically says that we can't release booking photos with some considerations. I think it's a guilty verdict, or like we were talking about, if it's if we need it to get the information out to the public, if it's something we're trying to apprehend, I think there's also consideration. Somebody is we can release it to like a state hospital, or we can release it to the party of the person that was booked in. And it also, and this part I'm not as in touch with, but the sites that are the pay for sites to get it removed, people can request to have their photos removed, and if not, then there's fines that can be attached to the companies that if they refuse to do that. And again, I think initially when this legislation was released, I think they thought law enforcement was not going to be in support of this, and again, the sheriffs are very much in support of it. We didn't want to have to release them like we were. Again, the stories that come out, I was hearing people were calling me and say, hey, can you get my photo off of this? I'm trying to get a job. I was arrested when I was 18. I wasn't even convicted. I did something stupid, but now it's keeping me from getting in the military. It's keeping me from getting this job because they see this come up. They see me at my worst time. And it's really, detrimental. And so it's really contributing to the whole problem we're trying to solve. And, we want people to have jobs. We want people to be, and if unlike Morgan, who was very successful in moving forward, we want to make sure if somebody has been arrested, that this isn't a detriment to them moving forward in their lives. And it was causing that because people weren't able to, again, a lot of people were holding judgment on people based on that photo alone because of what it looked like, what it, it's the photos are taken at the worst time. I mean, you got to say if there's one photo that's worse than a DMV photo, it's probably a booking photo. So it's just, and so again, this bill I think is really helping to go back to the way it was, where the photos aren't freely released, but except under certain considerations.
So this, of course, feeds into this other issue and this other concern that I know is very much at the heart center for Therese. we take the public access out of the storyline, and now we have a different conversation where the public and the media is concerned regarding access. So Sheriff Landers, is there any, at any level, can you provide some kind of assurance to the media, to the public who are concerned about this rollback, who are concerned about the loss of public records and what that might mean about being able to watchdog police activity and so on?
I mean, assurances that we're not going to be releasing the photos, that we're going to follow the statute. Is that what you're referring to? Or?
I think that there's some concern, for example, that now the police get to decide who sees and who doesn't see booking photos. And that there are certain particular situations where we can imagine that, you know, certain police would prefer no one saw certain booking photos. I think that's kind of at the heart of the matter. How can the media still do what the media does best? How can we hold government officials accountable if we can't see records that were once public and are now no longer public?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, the assurance are built into the statute. I think that, you know, there's sheriffs are already working on the technology changes they need to make to their systems to make sure that's not released except under these considerations. And I know when I testified, that was some of they were some of the questions that came up, you know, well, is it, you know, it's very subjective. Some of the, you know, are you going to be releasing it? And, you know, I know that I've already been contacted by and reached out to some of our local media here. And, you know, they're concerned that they're not going to be able to obtain the photos as freely as they were, and they want those photos for their story. And, you know, I assured them that we're going to follow the law, and there are considerations that we would, but it's, you know, we never wanted these to be exploited like this, and we be in law enforcement jails. And so, you know, we're going to be very careful in that. And, you know, I can't make assurances to all the sheriffs across the state, but again, we supported this measure. And, you know, so it's going to be individually on that. And I know that's one of the things that, as we talk about in our meetings, that consistency is important. The Oregon jails are a very tight group as far as standards and how they share information on different things that go into legislation. We have one attorney that's assigned to that. So I know that the jails across the state are going to have a consistent message as far as how that's released. So, you know, as far as assurances, I can tell you that in our legal advice, it's
I think, did we have a little freeze there for a moment, Diane?
Yeah, he's back though.
Okay, I think everybody's back. Therese, I wanted to give you a moment to comment.
I think as I said in the film, the media hasn't covered itself in glory on this subject across the board. There were news sites that, you know, put mugshots in galleries as a pure raw attempt to drive traffic. People like to click through them. It did increase audience for the website. We never did that at the Oregonian. That was never anything that we did. But I do have concerns about anytime we let law enforcement decide what the public should see. And my experience has been that it's harder to get information in those cases. And so I am concerned about, and I did testify against the law as it was written. I do think that the public ought to be able to get the mugshots as a public record. I agree that there's a difference between is it a public record or not, and how do the media handle it, and do they put it online and leave it forever and ever. You know, my feeling is, for instance, you know, say there you get a tip that people are being beaten up by XYZ police department. And you don't see the mugshots of people with bruises and black eyes and scrapes on their forehead because those are no longer public record. You also, you don't have full identification when you just release a name. If you have a common name like Jack Smith, you're not really informing the community that somebody's freedom has been taken away from them. And, similar way, a name doesn't always inform the public in important ways. So for instance, if you hear that so-and-so was arrested on child molestation charges, without seeing the mugshot, you don't know that so-and-so is your child's school bus driver. So I just feel like there are times when the media should have, and the public should have, access to mugshots. Did the pendulum swing too far? Was it too easy having them all online for these horrible websites that would scrape them and then charge people to remove them? I mean, yeah, that was a horrible thing. I'm glad the legislature moved to restrict that practice a couple of years ago. That's just, not a good practice at all. But does that mean the pendulum should swing all the other way so that, in fact, the public is not having access to what otherwise had been a public record? So the new law that goes into effect January 1st, 2022, says law enforcement can only release the mugshots when there is a law enforcement purpose, such as sorry, my puppy is running around in the background, but a law enforcement purpose, such as tracking down a fugitive or finding additional victims. But it puts all of the control in the hands of law enforcement. And what if that person is the son of the mayor, or the son of the police chief? There are times when the media, as the independent watchdog on behalf of the citizenry, ought to have a way into information. And that was my concern when I testified against it. I am a longtime proponent of government transparency. I'm always going to come down on the side of the public getting information about how their government works. I would say too, a couple of people have said it captures people at their worst moment. And I would just put this out there. I'm not saying it's a reason to run mugshots. I'm just saying it is true. And that moment when people see that photograph might be the turning point in their life. The Multnomah County Jail released one of the most effective anti-drug campaigns ever, called Faces of Meth, where a jail deputy, started seeing the same faces over and over as he was booking people and seeing the ravages of meth addiction. And he put those mugshots side by side over time. And you could see in a very short period of time the physical ramifications of meth addiction and meth use. And that poster and that effort, called Faces of Meth, became one of the most effective anti-drug messages in the United States. So, would that have happened had these not been public record? Probably not. It's just something I think that people need to think about. We think about the harm that transparency causes. I also like us to think about the good that comes from it at times.
Can I just respond to that? So Deputy, it was Brett King, right? That did that? Deputy?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. So I met him. He was a deputy. Because I was a United States Marshal in Marshal custody, I spent a long time going between county jails, Lane County, Multnomah County, Columbia County. I met Deputy Brett King. So while that initiative was incredibly visually compelling, I wouldn't say that it's effective, because our nation has higher rates of methamphetamine use and our state has higher rates of methamphetamine related deaths than ever before in history. It was very compelling. It was entertaining. It was alarming, but it was not effective in that it did not at all reduce meth rates. It did horrifically increase rates of stigma against people who use meth. And when you increase rates of stigma, that always has a negative health consequence. Was it entertaining? Yes, but at what cost? Because now it is a pop culture joke reference, the faces of meth, meth mouth, all these things. I know that he meant well and was super alarmed at the human costs of meth use that he was seeing coming before him in the jail. And that's why he did that. But I think its long-term cultural impacts were net negative because of the increase in stigma.
I thank you for that, Morgan. I can't really speak to that, and I probably shouldn't have said it was one of the most effective, maybe one of the most memorable was better. But I don't really think we know, because even though rates of meth are high, we don't know if rates would have been higher without that. We just don't know. So I shouldn't have said most effective. It certainly was very memorable. And we went back 10 years later and found as many of the folks as we could to assess the difference, and found a great number who that had turned their lives around. So my only point being that I would like people, when they say mugshots capture somebody at their lowest moment, to recognize that for some people that might be the turning point and the wake up call that they needed when they see themselves in that mugshot. It's just a philosophical approach of, let's think about, we always go to the harm. Sometimes information has a good effect too that we don't always see. And so, you would expect me as a newspaper editor, I'm always going to advocate for more transparency and more information for the public. I totally understand the long tail effect. That is why we have taken these steps. We almost never use mugs now because of the online long tail, and we have a system in place to allow people to ask us to remove those. Darcelle, I would like you to know, after I saw the movie, I asked them to remove your mugshot from OregonLive. It should not be there anymore. As you know, we can't always erase everything from the internet, but it is no longer on OregonLive.
They also send my picture and every fingerprint I've ever had, the back of my hand, the front of my hand, to Homeland Security.
Yeah.
And what happens to it there? Federal folks find out about Darcelle. Maybe that's a good thing.
It's tricky because you lived and died by your fame. If you had not been Darcelle, the media probably would never have been
I wouldn't
interested.
be smiling. I wouldn't be smiling if I turned out from a job, because I had explained over and over again that there was nothing done, nothing happened. And that the same thing was wonderful, because when I went to arraignment the next day, the gal said, well, they took it off the gender or whatever. And, and you're the reason that all the paparazzis are here. Well, yes, but I didn't invite them. And someone made t-shirts were on sale to see free Darcelle. So it made a joke out of it, something that's not a joke. It's not just because I'm Darcelle, it became a joke, and that's not right. Like everybody said, it destroys you. It can destroy you.
Well, and I think, can you also talk to the impact it had on Roxy?
Well, Roxy, my partner of 50 years, was on the door at the club, and he also touched the OLCC man on the arm and told him that those children can't come in here. Well, he went to the hospital for 3 days. He has a heart problem. So for 3 days he was in the hospital, and I went to police station. The man booking me in said, the police officer booking me said, my wife loves you. I said, well, let me go. Let me out of here. And it's just another thing. It's just another thing that caused him a lot of stress.
Can I?
Go ahead, Morgan.
Yes. My very first arrest for possession of heroin, this was a couple years after I was discharged from the Air Force, and I was doing like the double life thing, going to school, going to work, buying heroin with my tip money after school. And then I got popped in Multnomah County. That was back in the days of Busted, which was sold at all the plaid pantries and 7-Elevens and was always up by the register. and I made it on the cover. And so
Wow.
anyone who was walking to a convenience store to buy anything was seeing my face. And that is how my mom found out that I had been arrested, because I didn't want to tell her. And so she called me crying because she'd seen my face in the Busted magazine. So these things do have ripple effects out into our community. It's not just me, my face, you know, that is being hurt. Like my family didn't want to see that. Everyone I went to high school with didn't need to see that. And it was not like a transformational moment of change for me. That was a low where I was like, well, cat's out of the bag. So why should I have hope? Why, you know, entering recovery is incredibly difficult. But in that moment, I just didn't have the hope or energy to embark on that journey.
And where do you start with that? How do you start getting at it? You know, getting to everybody that saw your picture, and now your whole family's involved, and you don't know where to start.
But Busted was the paper equivalent of those horrible websites that just run mugshots. I think it was a little tabloid thing, and all it did was run mugshots of people, and it was distributed, I think free around the city.
I don't know what they're, in that case, I mean, the online galleries, you know, their business model is all about charging the people who want to take their pictures down, which is somehow just so morally reprehensible. I just can't even wrap my head around it. But I don't know if that was really true with Busted. Were they making money off of advertising? How did they operate?
Oh, I'm not going to lie. I bought one every time I went to Plaid Pantry. I found it entertaining. I would find my friends in there all the time. Look who got arrested this week. So like, I am guilty of being a consumer of the same thing that was harming me, right? And that is the paradox in which we often find ourselves. It was $1 for the magazine, and they also had ad revenue. That was their whole business model.
I want to play a little clip of yours, Morgan, from the video. And it kind of addresses the point we are in at this point in the conversation.
Maybe 1 out of every 1,000 arrests, it would be beneficial to public safety or police accountability to have the mugshots be public. But that does not justify the other 999 mugshots that will be published that day.
Wow.
So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on the Portland protests in this discussion. Yeah, for I think probably most people in this room kind of know what went down, but the short of it was that there were certain players, in particular the conservative journalist Andy No, who was pulling people's mugshots the same night that they were arrested, and then tweeting them out on his social media sites. And this thing really blew up, and the whole doxing situation got really, really crazy. And I think, and maybe, I don't know if Sheriff Landers, if you kind of can get behind this, but I think it was a real driver behind this House bill and the other House bill really moving as quickly as they did.
Yeah, I believe so. And other testimony on that was a driving force. I think just considerations for the safety of those individuals that were arrested and the booking photos were taken. We had to have considerations on that, because as quickly as they were trying to post those, then again, doxing and people were going to their houses and getting information and finding them, and again, just doing things. Again, the whole intention of the booking photo was never any of this, and that's where we need to really, I think, a lot of things with technology, you don't want to go backwards, but this is one of the things I think we need to go backwards. I need to maybe respond to what Therese said. it's not really the media that we're concerned with. It's really it's the busted, it's the pay to take down sites, it's incidents like this. It wasn't really the media. The media was using the photos with a story. They were going to post a story anyhow, so someone was going to read the name. They were just using the booking photo because that was the photo they had of the person. And it wasn't really to do all these other things that the consequences of what's been happening. So, I agree with a lot of things she's saying. And as far as assurances, again, as far as how it's been used, it never crossed my mind that, well, I'm going to be able to cover up something like this if it happens to law enforcement or something like this. It's really following it. And, I think that's where, trust with the sheriffs across the state that we're not going to do that. It's, that obviously it's not the reason why we supported the bill at all. And again, it's not for our media that's putting out information. I am completely for transparency and getting the information on the public, regardless of what it is, the good, bad, and the ugly.
That is an important thing. The public records law is really for the public. The media tend to use it quite a bit. The general public does too, but the media does. But with the media, you have some sort of recourse. You can call the editor and complain. You can write a letter to the editor. You can cancel your subscription. I mean, there is some address and recourse for bad behavior by the legacy media. When it's a public record, it's available to anyone. And then you have these horrible sites or busted, type magazines. And, I am a believer in transparency, but I understand that there's that tension between, should the media have it for its constitutionally protected news gathering purposes versus the public. We don't like to separate the two. We advocate for public information, not for just us to get information. But I will say that there are times then that makes sense. We did propose that there be a media carve out for journalistic reasons. That I think the bill, was well on its way at that point. And you're right, Sarah, when I spoke to House Judiciary Chair Janelle Bynum, who was, the bill was going through her committee. That was the doxing piece of this around protesters was one of the primary reasons that it was moving forward, that people were swept up in the crowd, arrested, their mugshots were going out nationally, and they were receiving harassing or threatening communications. The Oregonian OregonLive had decided quite early that with the mass of arrests around the protests, we feel an obligation, if we say somebody's arrested, to follow that case through and to say if charges were dropped or if they were convicted or what have you. And we knew that we could not commit to doing that. So we did not report on most arrests unless it rose to a certain level where we knew we would follow it through to its outcome. So the mugshot issue was not an issue for us around the protesters, but I do know that some media did routinely request those mugshots and did publish those.
Thank you. I wanted to get Morgan to weigh in on something here, because I think ultimately we wouldn't be having this conversation at all if it weren't for Google and the power of the search engine today. And so I don't think that, I think this is the really the elephant in the room. This is the thing that is missing in this conversation. This is a player. This is a stakeholder in this situation. And I don't know if this is about the algorithms or some kind of accountability on their end. But Morgan, you're probably the savviest among us all here on how to think about how technology reaches out into all parts of society and the impact that it has. What would you say to a Google representative if we had them here in the room?
Google's incredibly powerful, but what I've noticed, just with pieces I write, they get like reposted everywhere in the universe, right? And things just get so hard to take down. one of the last talks I went to before COVID crashed down upon us was by Sophia Noble, who wrote a book about how AI algorithms sort of project the harms of the past into the future. And just this sort of tech thing where us aggregating all this and then putting it forward into the search results can that's the one. She just won a MacArthur grant. And okay, so I'm thinking about that. So what is the place? I mean, Google absolutely should take more accountability, but they're not going to because it's a bad business model. So unless we're going to clamp down and like actually regulate these things, we live in a fairly free market capitalist society. And that I'm just saying that's our reality. So we need to work within reality and try to think of other ways, whether it be regulating these things in the past, having mechanisms for people to request to get their stuff taken down. And this is something I just, because I subscribe to Delete Me, which is a service that'll scrub your public information from those various like aggregator weird collection sites that'll like put your phone number and address on the internet for anybody to purchase. And so clearly like there are mechanisms to do these, but they're incredibly complex. You either have to pay someone money because they had to write complex code to do it, or you have to be incredibly savvy. So how do we make cleaning up your internet life more accessible to everyone? So not only the privileged few can garner the benefits of these services, of these mechanisms, because I do believe there are some mechanisms in place. Now, do we need more? Do we need more regulation? Yes, of course. But I am not a member of the US Senate, so So within reality, within my current day, yeah, just how do we make all of this more accessible in the here and now? And I think some of it is inevitable. Like my case went up through the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And so when you search my names in those, our court system, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Government transparency is incredibly important, and I support that wholeheartedly. So certain court documents of mine live online, and it does show things that I wish would not be available. But the benefit outweighs the cost, because that means everyone's court filings in that manner are online, and the level of transparency and accountability that provides is worth the cost to me. So this is a fine line that we are treading.
Thank you, Morgan. I wanted to try and wrap this up relatively soon. I think this is a good time if there are any questions that you have for each other, or if anyone who's joining us online has any questions. Or Diane, if you have any questions, I wanted to give people a chance to weigh in. Well, I think we first of all have to acknowledge the best dressed woman in the room. And thank you, Darcelle, for joining us today.
You only see from the shoulders up.
Well, you could show us the whole thing if you want.
Yeah. Let me quick, I'd like to say, public love it. Public love those pictures. They love the story. The public wants it out there. The public would be very upset if they wouldn't tell anything about somebody's problems. They love it. Look at all the detective shows and the Hollywood SAI and NI and whatever they are. All those things, they've been running for 25 and 30 years. Why do you think they run? Because people love that kind of entertainment. And Google is an entertainment. They'll look up my name and your name, anybody's name, you can find out all about them, and they love it. So, I don't think it's going to be that soon that it's wiped off of those stations that make millions and millions. I mean, the apps that make millions of dollars. I think that'll be there for a long time. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
I was going to say, I agree. It's unfortunate and sad, but our top on our website, our top hit by a lot is our jail roster and our booking photos. People go there every day to see who's in jail and see their picture. And it's
I
just,
know.
we have a lot of content that's good, and that's where they go to, the negative of seeing people. And, again, my friend in jail, and we've had even a lot of employers say, well, that's the first place I look. I mean, I would think I would call the hospital first, see if somebody wasn't at work, not going to the jail roster, but that's where people go for some reason.
I go to the jail roster, but that's because of the life I've lived.
Yeah, certainly there is a culture around mugshots that's undeniable. And, I sort of, in the background of the story, touched on the sort of celebrity mugshots. I included them at the end because, of course, that's a big thing. People love celebrity mugshots. But, it's.
They love to have you stumble.
What's that?
They love to have you stumble. The public loves whenever a known person stumbles, trips, and there's their picture.
Yeah, they like to see that. People fall off their pedestals. Yeah. Yeah, so you're right, Darcelle, this isn't going to go away soon. And the biggest issue is it's not going to go away at all for people who already have their mugshots up there. This is going to be a long time struggle. So really, on the best we can do right at this moment in time is try to make it better for people in the future. But it is impacting lives right now. And so these various measures at least can help mitigate, but they're small steps. And it would be nice if there was something more we could do. It'd be nice if on, December 31st, all of these mugshots just disappeared. I think Google has the ability to do that if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's not going to happen. We know that's not going to happen.
No.
Diane, would you like to give us a final plug on the festival here? We've got some time left and some fun things happening, and share a little bit out about the Portland Film Festival, which has so generously supported this effort today.
Sure. Thank you all for watching, and for all the panelists for joining us today. If you'd like to be able to see Mugshots of a Digital Age, please check it out at portlandfilm.org, and watch many of the other good films. The other film that Darcelle is in is called The 90s Club.